some of the previous videos that we talked about resilience, and we talked about the need for organizations to discuss future failure, to identify what's really important and those essential outcomes, and to look at the different impacts, that the different aspects of the system that could impact those outcomes, and to define the thresholds and the thresholds of what are kind of tolerable limits within the system. A key aspect that we identified in resilient organizations, once they've done those things, is that they then continuously stress test their systems to ensure that they're resilient. And this can be done through severe and plausible scenarios. But as one of our interviewees said, that one of the real breakthroughs for their organization was when they stopped playing hurricanes. And what they meant by that was that if you pull your top team together and run some kind of scenario around one particular event, the mindset that people often bring to that is that this is very unlikely to happen, or they'll bring in all kinds of details that will just confuse the scenario. So those organizations that we interviewed in this work, a lot of them are now moving to a situation where they stress test their systems by making a set of business assumptions, like, what if we can only operate with a 20% reduction of our staff, so only 80% of our staff? Or what happens if it's 70%? Or what happens if it's 60%? At what point can't we deliver those outcomes? Or what if we can't access these key resources or these key materials? So they make some assumptions around their resources that they need to deliver their essential outcomes, and then stress test using a set of business assumptions to see at which point their delivery of the essential outcomes are compromised.
Yeah, and I think this whole business about scenario stress testing, we've talked previously, I think, about financial sector and how they've built resilience post the financial crisis. And then a really important part of that was the stress testing that they were required to do to ensure that under severe but plausible scenarios, they could maintain within their sort of liquidity thresholds or their capital adequacy ratios. And that's really stood the test really through COVID-19, and we've seen it. But applying that thinking to the other four capitals that we talked about, I think is really a new way forwards. And I think out of everything, it's one of the ways we might see the biggest step change made in how people look at resilience in the end. Because I think we will move from just talking through these scenarios and what people think to effective modeling of what might happen and applying modeling techniques. And in particular, I'm thinking about things like digital twin type techniques to look at not just what would happen should a failure or a disruption or a change happen in the way we're doing things, but do our contingencies, do the resilience mechanisms we've got, the options we've built, when we apply those, what's the effect of those under this condition? And we can do the sort of what if analysis really effectively. And I think it can also support investment decisions in resilience as well. So if we make this investment in resilience, what is the effect on the outcome that we're trying to achieve? Does it actually help us? So I think it's a huge area and one that's going to become very, very important going forward.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of the organizations that we interviewed, some of them are using really quite sophisticated digital twin technologies in order to do this, but actually some of the others are using an approach that really doesn't have to be too complicated or too costly. It really is running through a series of what if scenarios, moving around some of the resources, looking at some of the assumptions around those, and bringing together some multidisciplinary teams. So you've got multiple voices in the room that understand different parts of the system. And if you can do that, you can really put together some really quite severe but plausible scenarios that can really help the organization test its resilience.
Yeah, one of the things we've been working on with many organizations is building a sort of scenario catalog. But the basic is the scenario is relatively short, but what we focus on is what are the variables that we can use to increase the stress. And they're usually You know, it can be a time variable, but it could be a capacity variable, a resource variable, or whatever. And that's what actually is really interesting. And then I think that coming back to the modeling and digital twin, yes, that we think actually in the first place, you get a lot of value just out of a low fidelity type of model. You don't, for resilience, you don't need this to be high fidelity initially, for sure, because you're not trying to get down to the very last process improvement here. What you're trying to get to is the big picture. What happens if something fails? What happens if we do this? And it can be quite big picture.
Yeah, and I really like that idea of a scenario catalog that can increase the stress on the system to find at the point where the resilience is compromised, because of course that helps the organization build the business case for an investment in resilience into the system.